Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Friday, the 24th day of January, 2025. And we have three stories this morning, and we're going to look at that, puts things into perspective of where we're at right now in this very delicate situation and a very important time in the ceasefire hostage situation and Israel's future. Here are the headlines. Hamas is making a big comeback in Gaza during the ceasefire, an expert warns. Headline number two, Hamas is trying to rebuild and run Gaza, making peace difficult. And headline number three, Israel must win this war. This is from Caroline Glick from the Jewish News Service that puts everything into perspective. An excellent, excellent article. Suggest everyone read it. We're going to look at a lot of the article, not everything there, but you'll get the point of what's going on right now. All right, here's basically what's happening. As the ceasefire is holding and Israel prepares to receive four more female hostages tomorrow, that would be Saturday, the seemingly insurmountable problem the nation finds itself in becomes all the more apparent. Hamas is giving the world and the people of Gaza the perception that they are still in charge. And if this ceasefire deal gets to phase two, which would see Israel completely withdrawing from Gaza, then the perception becomes reality. Simply put, Hamas wins, Israel loses. The organization that murdered 1,200 people on October 7th, 2023, will not be neutralized. Hamas will return to power, rebuild, recruit with the idea of doing it all over again in the future. And all the soldiers who went into Gaza from the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and died there will have died in vain. All this talk about Hamas not ruling Gaza, that its military will be neutralized, will not come to pass. Therefore, something must happen and must happen soon. We've had all these statements from some of the new leaders of the Trump administration, the defense secretary, and others that Hamas will not rule Gaza. There's no way they'll let them do this, et cetera, et cetera. But we've already been informed that the discussions are about to begin that will implement phase two, which refers to Israel leaving Gaza and basically turning it back over to no one else but Hamas. Now, as we're going to see from our stories today, Israel is in a seemingly impossible situation, really is. But here's what we know from Scripture. Israel will survive. Their enemies will not destroy them. We must always remember this because what we do here on Breaking News, first of all, we only do stories that have something to do with last days Bible prophecy and the headlines that reflect what it predicts. But also, too, we use this as a basis for where we're going. And that is what we're told in Scripture is Israel will survive. They will make it through a very difficult time. They will eventually turn to faith in Jesus Christ. The Lord Jesus will return and set up his kingdom. But first, Israel will go through the worst time in history, yet we are guaranteed from Scripture they will survive. Now, how this will happen is unknown for now. In the meantime, we begin with two stories to explain where we're at, to kind of put it in perspective. Headline number one, Hamas is making a big comeback in Gaza during the ceasefire. This is a warning from a particular expert, Dr. Michael Milstein, a senior researcher at the Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. He said the following. He said, the situation is not bad. It's terrible for us to say this because we wanted to see a battered, beaten, and maybe even barely existing organization. Yesterday, the educational system in Gaza announced that schools will soon reopen, even though 85% of the schools no longer exist. 6,000 Hamas police officers have been deployed throughout the Strip, making it clear to everyone who is in charge and signaling that there's no point in talking about a post-war era. In other words, Hamas is in charge. They're ready to take over again with this ceasefire going on, this so-called peace deal as the hostages get slowly but surely released. And so they're making it clear they're in charge. And headline number two reflects the same thing. Hamas is trying to rebuild and run Gaza, making peace difficult. The Islamist organization has resumed building rockets and underground tunnels, and it is financing itself through the selling of humanitarian aid. That's what's interesting. There are tons of humanitarian aid is coming into Gaza. Hamas has intercepted all of it and is selling it to the citizens of Gaza and using the money, of course, to basically make up for their losses. So they remained extensive in numbers, this terrorist organization, arms, and they're committed to fighting. So they haven't lost, haven't at all. As a new ceasefire takes hold in Gaza, Hamas fighters who normally dress in civilians' clothes during combat have seized the opportunity to wear their uniforms and parade through the streets in a show of force. In other words, they're not afraid of anything at all because they feel that they have won. The images shared online of Hamas brandishing weapons atop trucks and surrounded by civilian supporters cheering them on amidst the ruins make clear that despite heavy losses since October 7th, 2023, and the elimination of Hamas leaders, the terrorist organization remains extensive in numbers, arms, and commitment to fighting. For now, however, they may focus on rebuilding their ability to fight while trying to continue to control Gaza. All right. Now they're just starting to build from scratch. This will continue for at least another 4 weeks if the ceasefire hostage deal holds. But recall this, at the end of the 6 weeks, what's going to happen? Only 33 hostages will have been released, and some 60 are still unaccounted for. And at the end of this time, 6 weeks of Hamas showing its force, its power ruling Gaza. We've got a police force there. They're going to start their educational system again. They're given the idea that they haven't lost, and perception, like we said, will become a reality if phase two ever comes about. Now, our third headline is what we're going to concentrate on. Caroline Glick, our favorite Israeli slash Jewish author, explains the dilemma in a fabulous article she wrote from Jewish news, found a Jewish news service. It says Israel must win this war, and highly recommend you read it if you have a chance, because it goes into great detail, more detail we'll go through here about why it is necessary. So let's hit the highlights here. The Palestinian war against Israel is a zero-sum game. Either Israel wins, ensuring its survival, and the Palestinians are defeated, or the Palestinians win and Israel's countdown to destruction begins. On October 7, 2023, Israelis saw what the end looks like. Now let's get this. Let's remember what took place. Thousands upon thousands of Palestinians invaded the country in wave after wave, wave after wave. They were unified in their barbaric hatred of Jews and bloodlust. The atrocities the Palestinians committed against their overwhelmingly Jewish victims were like nothing we had ever imagined. And they were made all the worse by the fact that everyone participated. All right, roaring crowds handed torches to 10-year-olds, giving them the honor of lighting homes ablaze, burning entire families alive. The Palestinian hordes whooped and laughed in ecstasy as they raped, tortured, and murdered their victims and beheaded about at least two-thirds of them. When they arrived in Gaza with their hostages, both dead and alive, they were greeted by crowds of thousands as conquering heroes. Yes, Hamas planned the sadistic genocide. Yes, Hamas led the charge, but it was the whole of society that was participating in this endeavor. Let's never forget that. Somehow, over the past 2 weeks of President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff's deal-making, the events from October 7th seem to have faded from view. The deal he demanded that Prime Minister Netanyahu accept is incomprehensible in the context of that day. Ignoring October 7th, Witkoff and Israeli cheerleaders present the deal as a step on the road to peace. When the ceasefire becomes permanent, he has said, the Saudis will rush to make peace with Israel. So will Qatar and everyone else. Indeed, Witkoff told Fox News on Wednesday even Hamas would be welcome at the table and Trump would get a Nobel Peace Prize. The same Fox News interview, Witkoff explained that his deal was precisely the deal that former President Joe Biden tried to coerce Israel to accept last May. The Biden deal at its core was a ransom deal. Israel, Biden said, would pay Hamas generously for the release of some of the hostages. How generously? Well, depends on what phase you're in. The Biden-Witkoff deal is a three-phase deal, and each phase is a separate agreement. The first involves massive Israeli concessions to Hamas that are rife with dire strategic consequences for Israel in exchange for 33 hostages, including all the women hostages. And here again, she summarizes what we've said before. To receive the 33, Israel is required to free nearly 2,000 terrorists, hundreds of whom are convicted mass murderers. It must withdraw its forces from the cities of Gaza and the Netzarim corridor, permitting the mass return of Palestinians to northern Gaza. And it must permit the full resupply of Gaza still under Hamas control. All told, Israel is paying for the 33 in a manner that risks all of its soldiers' hard-won gains on the battlefield over the past 15 months of war. In other words, it'll all be in vain. While this is a steep price, it pales in comparison to the price of moving to the second phase. Under the terms of the Witkoff-Biden agreement in the second phase, Israel shall withdraw all its remaining forces from Gaza, including from the border separating Gaza from Egypt. In other words, Israel must cede control of Gaza to Hamas. In exchange, Hamas will return the remaining live hostages to Israel, but retain the bodies of the hostages it has murdered. Phase one makes it difficult for Israel to restore its previous gains, and that's the phase we're in right now. Phase two secures Hamas's victory. The implication of a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza is that Hamas wins the war. It survives not only intact, but in full control of Gaza. It's respected worldwide as the jihadist force that committed genocide and survived to rebuild and do it all over again. Now, the Biden administration sold this deal by ignoring the strategic implications of October 7th. He and his advisors objectively refused to draw the necessary conclusions for what happened. The atrocities that day show that the Palestinian war against Israel is a zero-sum game. Simply put, either Israel wins, ensuring its survival, and the Palestinians are defeated, or the Palestinians win, and Israel's countdown to destruction begins. Now, Israelis who have demanded the destruction of Gaza were demonized as genocidal extremists rather than realists who understood the implications of this bloodlust. The administration, that's Biden, refused to accept the legitimacy of Israel's war goals of destroying Hamas and preventing Gaza from ever posing a threat in the future. And here's the key. They placed hostages at the center of the narrative. The Palestinians weren't an enemy. They were victims of Israel, which was waging a war for no reason. Israel has the right to defend itself, but not to harm its enemy. The hostage ransom deal, as crafted by the Biden administration officials, was a means of joining Hamas and exploiting Israel's anguish over the plight of hostages to prevent Israel from winning the war. Israel, Biden, and his advisors believed it would be ensnared in the deal as phase one moved to phase two. The deal was structured in such a way, and here's the key, that it would make it almost impossible for Israel to walk away. Now, that's what we have been saying. We're right now in the second week of phase one, second group of hostages. 4 females will be released tomorrow. There'll be 1 female hostage left after this. And every day Hamas looks more in charge of Gaza. They're already talking about, like we said, of negotiating on phase two a little bit early. That's Israel's complete withdrawal, and Israel's actually talking to them about this. And so they're supposedly the negotiations begin 16 days after the implementation of phase one. Now, if Israel walked away, the last of the 33 would remain behind. So if Israel walks away after this phase one is over, you've still got 60 hostages that are there. Well, we don't know how many are still alive, but can you imagine the uproar? The families there crying out. You got the leftist Israeli news. They'll say, "Look, we've got to do this. This is, we have to at any cost get these hostages back. Look at the suffering they've gone through. You've gone this far. You have to finish the job." Well, in finishing the job, it'll basically finish Israel with their chances for any type of victory. So she asked the question. Given the stakes, 2 questions arise. What does President Trump intend to do with Biden's agreement going forward? And what does Israel intend to do? By adopting Biden's framework, Trump placed himself in a box. He wishes to prevent new wars from happening in the Middle East, but if he maintains faith with this deal, he ensures that even larger wars will break out in the region during the course of his 4 years in office. He also guarantees that massive jihadist assaults in the U.S. and the West will occur. After all, if Hamas is successful in murdering 1,200 Israelis in a day, if that gave to the rise of the avalanche of anti-Semitism and jihad worldwide, there can be little question what a Hamas victory over Israel in the war will bring. In other words, if they got, received the kudos so far, what they did on October 7th, what's going to happen now when we find out they win, Israel capitulates, and the U.S. is allowing it to happen. Now, going to Iran, the Iranian regime is not interested in a deal. It's interested in destroying Israel as well as the United States. So to win peace in the Middle East, and here's a solution, Trump must walk away from Biden's failed policy of standing with Iran and its terror proxies, Lebanon, the Palestinians, and Gaza. He must restore his first term's doctrine of supporting Israel's allies against America's enemies. If he backs Israel in returning to the battlefield to secure Hamas's defeat in Gaza, and maintaining its buffer zones in Gaza permanently to prevent the area from threatening the Jewish state in the future, then he will build a foundation for a long-term peace between Israel and the Arabs of the region. As for Israel, the dilemma is whether to sacrifice its future collective security for the salvation of the hostages today or to secure its national survival. Israelis who support the first option speak of the damage to Israel's soul if we accept that the hostages may continue to suffer. Well, again, on and on. As we've said, there are people out there, and many of the politicians, at all costs, the hostages must come back no matter what we do. We have to get them back. And of course, as we've said from the beginning, and as there's certain voices that are still speaking out in Israel are saying, but they're kind of drowned out by others. If we give in, if we capitulate now, something's going to happen in the future. It's going to be a lot worse. And what they've done is we've done here, they've talked about in the past certain times when Israel gave away traded hostages for peace, which included terrorists. And what happens? The prisoners that not have hostages being brought back to Israel, they traded prisoners for that. And what do these prisoners do? Well, they continue to participate in terrorism. They were mass murderers before. They became mass murderers afterwards. And so they were let go. And these are some of the people who are the planners, the people behind all of these situations that have happened in the past. So is it going to happen again? Well, we'll see. As she concludes, October 7th showed us our enemy, and now we've seen it. We can't ignore the truth. For the nation of Israel and the state of Israel to survive, Israel must win no matter what the cost. Well, that's very well put. So what's going to happen next? We're going to soon find out and find out how Israel gets out of this impossible dilemma it finds itself in. Because the way it's going, there's really no answer, humanly speaking. Something's going to give, something's going to happen. We don't know because we do know how it's all going to turn out. How we get there, only God knows, but it's going to be interesting to find out. So please pray, and we'll keep you informed of what's going on as it gets the situation more difficult and dire each day for Israel. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow we'll have the week in review. Don't miss that as we look at the stories of this week and summarize where we're at right now with everything going on. Then Sunday, we do our Sunday message where we talk about part two about forgiveness and what the Bible talks about that. What if we don't feel like forgiving someone who has sinned against us? What do we do? And we'll let you know on part two about, again, how we're to react to that. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.